I was really heartened by the sight of the snow on the hills this morning. I don't know if anybody else had that same reaction. I'm just going to blaze through a couple of slides. This is framing for people who are looking at the slides but aren't here. Everybody here knows that this is a serious issue, and it's going to be hard to fix. And we know that California is a leader, and that the current state efforts deserve our support. But the problem is so big that we, even with the economic downturn, if you look at this is a graph of CO2 emissions in California versus time. And it's dipped maybe 10% from its peak. So we're only 10% of the way there, even with a tailwind from the recession. So we have a lot of work to do. The state needs all the help it can get. One of the ways that we could make it easier for the state is by acting locally. The more cities that take action, the more easy it is, I think, for the state to do things politically and technically. So I have been trying to understand what has come before, I've been looking for examples of local action, and the big one is British Columbia. That was an amazing thing that they were able to pass a revenue-neutral carbon tax. And it's sort of unique. They had a conservative leader who just suddenly realized, hey, this is real, I got to do something about it. And he had some friends and he asked, what's the best way to do this? And they said, well, a revenue-neutral carbon tax. And so he made it happen, which is kind of amazing. And there was actually some drama along the way, and my slides will be online at kegel.com/climate, and I'll put that address up later. But these are really good links to read up on. Another interesting story is what happened in places like Australia and Alberta, Canada, which is happening now, and Mexico, which is happening now. When they tried to raise the price suddenly of carbon emissions or fossil fuel, there was a lot of pushback. There were riots in Mexico, in Australia, and in Alberta. There was really bad publicity. And in Australia, the pitchforks came out, and the government was out on its, took us pretty quickly thereafter, and the carbon tax is now dead meat down there. So the lessons maybe from those three countries are phase in slowly and make sure that the most vulnerable people are going to be okay. Sort of do a stress test ahead of time and fix the problems if you can. California is actually trying to do some of that. Here's an illustration of one of the problems in Alberta. On Twitter, the CBC, they're a good news outfit, but they had an unfortunate headline on Twitter. Grieving families slapped with carbon tax for cremation, right? So what happened there was a conservative funeral home said, well, what are we going to be paying extra? And their accountant said, well, this much, only he made a decimal point error. CBC apologized for the bad headline, but you know, these things catch fire. I think it died down pretty quickly. But another problem is in Alberta, somebody got up at a town hall with the premier and said, I'm just barely making it, I'm poor, and how can I, you know, my utility bills are this high, how can you justify making me pay more? And he didn't have, rolling off the tip of his tongue, a story about the Lifeline program that Alberta has for lowering utility bills and so on. And so if you're talking about this kind of a thing, you need to be prepared ahead of time for questions like that. Another thing is a lesson from Australia. The people who had the No on Carbon Tax campaign, they were really good at working the framing of the problem, just like the Elephant Party is here in the US. And one of the lessons that people who are aware of framing will tell you is that clean energy polls really, really well. People understand that concept. Carbon, No, dead stairs. So you really need, if you're going to be branding an effort, you need to be very careful to do something that will resonate positively with people. Turning back to California, there are a few laws, as was mentioned earlier by RL, that make it harder to pass environmental regulations that involve fees or taxes. Proposition 26 in 7 years ago made it so that anything that smelled like an environmental tax needed a 2/3 vote. There was a little bit of an effort to repeal it in 2011, but it didn't go anywhere, I think. There are a number of ways around this problem, technical ways. You could structure a carbon fee and dividend as two bills that were linked. One was the fee and one was the dividend. Another way to do a really small carbon fee would be to make it a fee for inspections on the carbon fuel industry, like a fee for a statewide inspection program for all fossil fuel pipelines. That might fly, and it might resonate too. And it'd be kind of neat to have a small carbon fee statewide. It would be the first one, I think. Anyway, on to more positive stories. Berkeley passed a soda tax, which is kind of amazing. They did this over several years. There were a number of efforts before that failed, and the guys in Berkeley got together and tried to analyze why it failed. One of the reasons it failed was they realized that their opponents were picking off churches and saying, "Hey, if you'll go against this soda tax, we'll buy you and you something." And so they inoculated the city against that by going out to all the groups and saying, "Hey, we're Berkeley. We don't work like that. We stick together." Another way is they used very clear messaging, and they structured their bill not as previous efforts did as a special tax, but as a general tax whose revenue was not dedicated solely to any particular purpose, and that was just to get around Prop 26. And it worked. All of these references here are available in my paper if you want to read up on the history. Another sort of negative example from the recent past is in Vermont, when they tried to pass a carbon tax. They set the limit on it. They said, well, it'll go no higher than $88 a ton. And immediately the right wing jumped on it and said, that's like passing $1 gasoline tax. And they made a lot of hay with that. So the lesson there is set your limits sort of low, like British Columbia did. And don't try to go all the way right away, I think. Another really interesting thing is that there's basic human psychology at work that makes it hard for people to understand what the fee is for if they're not getting something for it. They have a really small focus, and it's like all they see is the money leaving their pocket, and they're mad unless they're getting something. So if you give them back clean energy, they might go, oh, that makes sense. Or something like that. So that's something to be aware of, and it's powerful. Another psychological thing is that people are upset if you ask them to do something they can't do. So they need to know that they have alternatives available. So really jacking up the carbon fee when people can't get electric or hybrid pickup trucks is not going to fly too well in some counties. So 2020, which is the year when hybrid pickup trucks become available from Ford, might be a good year to start ramping things up politically. I don't know. But generally, making people aware of their alternatives is going to make it easier for them to feel comfortable with these ideas. And another little thing you could consider is state action that enables local action or incentivizes local action. It's been tried recently in Illinois. Illinois offered matching grants for cities that passed vehicle registration taxes of some sort. We could consider something along those lines. And I think my last story is in Albany, California. They're actually trying to do a revenue-neutral carbon tax shift, but they're having a hard time because PG&E sells both gas and electricity there. And right now, the utility tax is the same for both gas and electricity, and PG&E wants like $200,000 for changing that. And Albany's going, we're a small town. So if the state could somehow make it easier for towns like Albany to split their different utility tax rates by telling PG&E they had to do it, that might help some. So that's my talk. I had just a quick tour through some past experiences. The key ideas are basically start gentle, don't go too fast, don't go too far. And remember that people have these various psychological filters that are really important to be aware of. And last but not least, because CCL's focus is national, it's possible that a spin-off group, a state affiliate, might be needed to really focus on California-specific issues. So stay tuned.